Hello and welcome to Learning Outcome Leaders, brought to you by Genian. I'm James. And I'm Scott, and on this podcast, you'll hear us chatting to higher educational professionals who can talk the talk about how they've been there and done it. We'll discuss some of their proudest and most ambitious projects and explore the most effective ways in which they've helped to improve and elevate their students' experience. In this episode, we'll be talking to Amanda Hagman, Adjunct Professor of Data Analytics and Information Systems at Utah State University. We'll explore how she's used predictive analytics to better support student retention, including one fascinating example which involves a free drink at a sports game. Want to find out more? Let's get into the episode. Awesome. Well, yeah, let's kick it off then. Amanda, thank you so much for joining today. Really appreciate you being here. I guess, who are you? What's your sort of experience? What's your origin story within education? And maybe give us a real sort of formative experience that you had in education. What got you into education?
So my name is Dr. Amanda Hagman. I wrapped up a PhD in quantitative psychology. And you might say, well, how is quantitative psychology falling into higher ed? But higher ed actually became my love and passion during my PhD. So one of the great things that I was doing is I was looking at these rigorous statistical models that weren't being applied at the university at all. And the thing that I loved more than anything was tracking behavior across time. And at the same time I was doing my PhD, an opportunity at the university opened up to look at student persistence. Student persistence is a little bit different than student retention. When you're looking and reporting cohort retention year over year, it's defined very specifically. And it also takes longer to get because you have to wait a full year to look at those retention numbers. So we took a unique approach by looking at semester to semester persistence. And we didn't only stick to the very specific cohorts, but we wanted to see how likely each student was to roll over from one semester to another. And that wasn't just a model of, are we keeping people at the university, but it was really mission driven of, are we helping people to persist towards graduation? Because we know when people don't persist towards graduation, especially in the US, they leave with a mountain of debt without a credential, and they end off worse off than their peers who didn't go to college in many situations because of that debt that's associated with college. Um, and so I was able to jump into this role with a heavy stats background and this love of tracking behavior. Looking at that, we were able to find some really cool places where the university had leverage to help students persist that they didn't know existed before. And I was so surprised by all of the things that we were able to work with collaboratively across the university to really help students move the needle so that they could end up in a better place, that they could persist towards their graduation and really leave with the credentials that they were hoping to get at the beginning.
Awesome. I really thank you for. I think there's like a always confusion behind like persistence and retention, right? I think people think they go hand in hand, but they are distinctly very different. So it's really interesting to hear that you were focused on distinctly persistence versus retention. I have a follow-up question about your PhD though. Why did you choose to do that for your PhD?
Oh, I actually have a really circuitous background. My undergraduate was in biology. And after I finished my degree, I actually landed what I considered my dream job. I was looking at intergenerational cancer and based on your diet. That wasn't a very eloquent way of saying it. But what we were looking at is we had mice models, and some of the mice mothers were fed really healthy diets, and some of them were given really bad, fat, heavy diets. Then after that, all of the mothers were exposed to cancer in a way that would give the mice babies an increased risk of cancer. And we were able to find that these mice moms who had really good, healthy diets were able to protect their babies through their diet. And I love that. This is Dr. Benninghoff's work. She's brilliant. Um, but as I was doing that, I realized that the work that I was able to do in that space was very limited. And I wanted to stretch my own skills. And when I really sat down to think about what's the type of work I want to be doing, I realized that I was so much stronger in the statistics space than I actually was in the biological science space. And so I started looking around at other projects that existed to get into, yeah, to expand my education. And I came across this other really great laboratory with Dr. Lockhart, and she had the prevention science laboratory. And it let us look at human behaviors, whether in education and business and mental health and substance abuse, and how people change their behaviors across time. And I fell in love with that space. And so I moved from the biological sciences into this statistics, but this very human centered statistics of how people change across time. And that's really where I've been able to find this niche in my career, whether I've been in higher education or right now where I'm in learning and development. It just has so many cross avenues across industries. And I found that to be really rewarding professionally.
So interesting that like even from your PhD, a lot of that was, when you talked about the mice mothers then being able to change the behaviors with their offspring when it comes to sort of diets, that you've managed to find that that's such a specific sort of thing that you've enjoyed across then literally across species and sectors as well. So that's so interesting that once you found that you've been able to sort of keep that going throughout. And I guess in terms of looking at behaviors within higher education and, sort of how you sort of came uh, to be at USU in that role. What was your, I guess, experience of higher education and sort of persistence yourself with your peers and things like that? Was it something that you were aware of as a student that, hey, we don't have a sense of belonging that I might want to have at the university, or there's certain things that you were noticing, or did that come after when you started the role?
No, one of the cool things is as we were looking at these models, and we had partnered with a vendor, is you could look at individuals for their persistence. And so I actually used myself quite often because I was still a PhD student. And at one point, they used a color scheme. So if you're green, you're good to go. If you're blue, there's a little bit of wiggle room. And then you drop down into the yellow and reds. And that's not a good place to be. And at one point, I pulled myself up to show everyone how this tool works. And I had dropped from a green to a blue. And I had remembered that I forgot to register for my courses for the next semester. It was my last semester, and it was able to tell that I was delayed in my assignment. But so what it's looking at there was a very specific thing, is Amanda registering on time? But there's other things that the model looked at and that we specifically did projects on that had to do with, what are student behaviors like? And there was one really interesting one. Utah State University is located in the mountains of Utah. It is a beautiful campus, so close to skiing. During the summer, it's got beautiful dams that you can go to. Like, it's a great place to be, but it is cold during the winter. And to walk around, one of the things that we looked at for one of the organizations were the computer labs, and how are the computer labs influencing student persistence. And we found that if students went to computer labs instead of studying at home during the wintertime, there was a significant lift in their persistence. And so computer labs, even though it's this technical piece that doesn't often get pulled in with the student experience, that finding your resources and your support on campus was very different than people who would shut in their apartment during those cold winter months. And so then the computer labs were able to show how they're associated with persistence, and they could encourage students to come and do their work collaboratively on campus, to use the advanced softwares that were in the computer labs, and just to even find the common spaces as a benefit, not just for getting an assignment done, but for how they're able to persist towards graduation. So that one was kind of a fun one, of just finding the camaraderie on campus, using the resources, and making sure that you are feeling like you're part of campus. And that's just kind of an interesting one that popped out that we did not anticipate seeing, that it had specifically a winter semester lift for those attending the university.
That's that's super interesting. I was at a conference recently, and they were I was at a talk. I can't remember who was talking, but they were talking about a software which they use, which is basically like a kind of like a social media for the campus itself, and they would monitor the things that were being spoken about. So one thing that kept coming up was hiking kept coming up. So they created a community on the campus which was all designated towards hiking, so that they knew all these people could come and go, oh, I like hiking. Actually, we've spoken a lot about hiking, and come to there to help build that like camaraderie around that same thing, and then they can, are more likely to persist because they're coming around like common hobbies and common interests all in one place. So it's really interesting to hear that you have that, like it's kind of like a similar thing, right? It's like if they're around, you're noticing these things where they're all around the same place, and that is affecting the persistence. What you mentioned the green light, the blue light, the red light. Is that an early alert system?
Yeah, that was the alert system. It was an alert system specifically designed for advisors who are seeing, one-on-one level persistence for students. They also had groups just at an administrator's level that they could see, okay, this is how many blues and greens and yellows and oranges that exist within your university. And you could learn more about those groups. So depending on the audience that you were looking at, you had different levels of permission and different levels of granularity, also based on the types of decisions that you were making. So yes, the system had an alert for you to work on those specific groups.
That's brilliant. I remember speaking with someone about that sort of thing where they looked at even just the scheduling of classes sometimes, and they'd seen that anecdotally 9 a.m. on a Monday, students that were in those classes were less likely to graduate than if you put that then to say 11 a.m. on a Tuesday, because it was just a more time-friendly situation, not just for the everyday student, but then actually the student athletes that might still be traveling back from a game, that sort of thing. And being able to have that level of granularity where on the face of it, the student is signing up for a class, it's the same lecturer, it's the same class content that it's always been, but you can shift something so small by an hour or 2 hours, but the actual sort of in-life experience impact that can have on a student can be really huge. I think it's so good that we're in a position now where we can get so granular with this sort of information. I know you sort of talked a little bit before the podcast started. You mentioned about sense of belonging, and that being a real sort of important thing for students. I wonder if you could sort of talk a little bit about that and some of the findings that you had on that side of things.
Um, so sense of belonging at a university is huge. And because of some of the granularity we were able to have, you could really see that sense of belonging had a very strong influence, especially during those early years at university. And so freshmen who weren't able to find a sense of belonging were far more likely to drop out than those who had a stronger sense of belonging. And we were working hand in hand with our athletics department and looking at the lift that students got from attending games. And one of the things that we saw, especially for our freshmen and sophomore, that attending a sporting event was a huge lift in their persistence. And that's because they had this sense of belonging, a sense of community. And because we had this early alert system, we didn't just do a blanket invitation, but we looked at those who were yellow and orange and red, and we're able to send a really specific invite that says, hey, next basketball game you come to, get a free popcorn and a drink on us. And that increased the number of people who were yellow, orange, and red attending basketball games. And that put them in a place where they could develop a sense of community and a sense of belonging within the organization. And for that small lift of a drink and a popcorn, they were able to have a significant increase in the number of freshmen and sophomores that persisted to the next semester. And even more significantly, they persisted from, we see the greatest drop during our summer months. So a freshman might go through their fall and their spring, and then we call it the summer melt. And we just lose a bunch of those freshmen going into their sophomore year. But we saw a significant lift that would typically be lost in the summer melt returning because they had built a sense of belonging for the cost of a beverage and a popcorn. And it was a huge success at the university.
That's fascinating. How did you track the students then? How did you, the ones which you sent these tokens to, how did you track that they were actually going to these games and
Yep.
were persistent on
So
that?
we use a system where their student ID is scanned to get into the game. So there's a student section at our football games, basketball games, gymnastics meets. And if you scan, you're able to get in. And so because they have these scans, you're able to then track who is attending. But the reason that we needed to work hand in hand with this organization is because they then own their participation data, their student ID scans. And so by working together, we were able to break down a data silo to show that these types of scans coming into basketball games and football games and gymnastics meets, those all have a sway on student persistence and data that exists at a larger university level. So working interdepartmentally became really important for these types of analyses that we were doing.
It's fantastic. I think it's such a specifically North American experience when it comes to college sports. We have nothing like that in the UK, and my sense of belonging really as a student came from my group of friends and where exactly just where I lived, and the fact that I liked the city that I lived, but actually that sense of belonging of being to a university and an organization and a sort of a wider family isn't there as much. And for people that are listening, there is a lot of sports jerseys behind me. Sport is a big part of my um life, but I think it's something that's so amazing that you can all of a sudden have a student that, might not necessarily feel comfortable on campus. It's a new town, it's a new city. Higher education can be quite intimidating, and then all of a sudden be surrounded by 60,000 like-minded people once a week. All of a sudden you get that sort of moment of pride of like, yeah, I'm a USU student, or
Yeah.
I go to LSU. This is unbelievable. I'm part of this sort
Yeah.
of wider thing. I think it's so, yeah, a bit of a random tangent, but I think it's such a specifically fantastic thing that you guys do. And was this something that you were doing sort of as a once-off, so it was get your first drink for a first week, or was this something that continued throughout to sort of try and get students back through the gates week on week?
Yeah. So because we looked semester to semester, we did have counts of how many times Amanda went to a game versus James or versus Scott. So we could look at that by like a quantity, like is it better to be a regular attender like Scott or a once timer like Amanda? And so we were able to do some of those analyses. We did not do it in real time though. Instead, we looked at this semester to semester granularity. And I know that there were some lifts and changes, that the largest lift was between those who never attended and those who at least attended something. And so looking at those two groups, we saw the largest lift. And so we weren't really concerned about making someone a fanatic, but just helping them get in and feel the camaraderie and knowing that that exists when they need it or when they can use it. And I think, James, going back to what you were saying, because, in the US, we do have a very specific feel for traditional students, but we have a growing number of non-traditional students where students often who don't complete their degree, they start it, but they don't finish. We're really trying to open those doors so that we can bring them back in. Sure, they may be in their 40s or their 50s, but we want to create the same experience, not necessarily through basketball games, but help them to be persistent towards that end goal of having their bachelor's degree. And so finding those right levers to turn based on the group that they live in, it doesn't necessarily mean that they both started in 2025, so they need to be treated the same, but Our non-traditional students need to be treated with the same amount of vigor, but for the lever points that are most valuable to them, whereas an 18-year-old may have very different levers that need to be turned to help them master this behavior of persisting towards graduation.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. I think specifically with non-traditional students, first generation students that are coming in and don't have that experience of, I'm going to go to this game because my mom and my dad went. That's where mom and dad met. So that's where I'm
Yeah.
going to,
Yeah.
go to these games and things like that. I wonder how sort of widespread some of that data is that you've sort of looked at. Another thing that's sort of unique, I guess, to North America, that sort of fraternities, sorority sort of groups and things like that. That's, I would imagine, and I might be wrong. Please do correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine again that's something that students that are second, third, fifth generation students are more likely to get involved in and have that sense of belonging from that community. Did you ever sort of go down that route, sort of looking at that membership to sororities and how that might have impacted things?
I believe we looked at something like that. It's not fresh on my mind. And Utah State doesn't have, we definitely have fraternities and sororities, but it's not quite as strong as a presence that I know exists in other locations. So I won't speak to it. But I do know that, fraternities and sororities, especially as they create a sense of community and provide service, really do help lift that identity as a student, which can be huge. But again, I don't have a personal expertise in it.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for that. Go ahead, Scott.
I So you mentioned earlier that there needed to be a lot of work when it came down to interdepartmental work. Talk us through that. What were like some of the challenges of like pulling this data together, getting this project up and running?
Oh, it is huge. So at the time, I would call myself a data wrangler because it really um, lowered the threshold to being accepted by my peers. But I would always tell people in close circle that when you're a data wrangler, it's 50% wrangling data and 50% wrangling people. And so you have to get the buy-in of the individuals doing this. One of the mistakes that we made early on is we went to a group and we said, hey, we've got this really great tool and we're building out this department for student success. It was a student analytics center is what it was called. And we came in and we had this really robust data on their program because their data, it was not siloed. And so it was something we could access. And we came to them and we said, look at what we know about you. And all of a sudden these walls went up. And it wasn't something I was anticipating as a PhD student, especially a PhD student who loved data, because all of a sudden there was a power imbalance that I knew these things about your work that you do not know. And so we scrapped that model from the beginning, even though there was a ton of data that we had access to. We decided to do the legwork up front and say, hey, we have this new tool. Can we run it for you so that you can see the impact you're having towards persistence instead of coming and saying, hey, we've got this new tool. This is the impact you're having, because we needed that upfront buy-in. And we really took a very unique approach because, like I said, the tool had the power. We could do that. We had management and leadership support. We could have rammed this down their throat. But instead, we wanted this to be a grassroots growth effort where, yes, we were supporting the departments, but then we wanted those department leaders to then walk away and use that data to support their cause with their leaders. Um, and so we had to be very strategic in the way that we rolled this out because especially at universities, people really appreciate their autonomy. They are experts. They're highly valued staff members. And going in there and just telling them what they should do or what the numbers actually look like um, didn't have the impacts that we wanted it to. And so making sure that we were very much people centric and helping them solve the problems that they wanted to became a huge part of helping them show the success within their organization. The other piece that we would do, because the data analysis that we used was very quantitative, we had certain access to data that was easily quantifiable. But there's also all of these good student stories and experiences and qualitative data. And so we would also work with them and say, okay, this is what the quantitative story looks like. Do you have anything that you'd like to add? And they'd say, yes, there is this student who did X, Y, and Z. It really showcases the type of work that we do. I want to put that in there. And so as we were pulling together all of these insights, we would open it up for conversation and say, does any of this surprise you? Is there anything you want to add? Is there anything that you don't think was captured here? And I think that's a really big lesson for anyone who is a data professional, that the data only is a shadow of the things that you actually care about. And some of those stories, even though they're not easily quantifiable, they are just as compelling and really strong examples of what you're trying to do at the organizational level. And so being just data driven shuts you off to some really important insights that you could have. So those are a few of the techniques we used as we rolled it out across the university. And we had fantastic success in getting people to adopt this new technology.
It's it that's great to hear that like you're people focused. I think data's scary for a lot of people, right? It's so useful to understand where you could get better, but by saying that, you're also pointing out where you're not doing so well. And I think that is scary for a lot of people. And having it all laid bare like that, you need someone to come in with a real human centered approach and be like, look, what do you want out of this? We're trying to help you. We're trying to make you better. And we need to understand this to make you better. What, what things have you seen like leaders and people in the space do because of the data you've provided them?
So a huge success again was the basketball game. So it's specifically winters, like I said, it's cold. We want to get people up and feeling engaged with the organization even during the winter. So it was basketball that really did the outreach to get students at the games. I feel like that was just such an interesting, fun, and quick switch that could be turned. Other huge pieces that advising was able to adopt was that they were able to look at those signals, and they found that they were actually spending the most time with those who were already green and blue. And the students who were yellow, orange, and red were only getting a fraction of their time. So they were able to strategically go in and say, you know what, we need different communication going out to our red, yellow, and orange to proactively pull them into the advising session so that they can talk through this. One of the things that is true about young students is that they may be in a major that they are finding out that they don't love. And that can make them question, maybe I don't fit at the university. But if they can have those early conversations with an advisor, they can find a place or a space that's more meaningful and aligned with what they want to do professionally. But when they're left to solve that on their own, they just feel like misfits. And so the advising group were able to proactively reach out to students using different scripts that would ring true to these groups and invite them in for personal sessions. And we did see an increase in the number of people switching majors, but that's not a bad thing. When you switch majors, that means that you are committed and that you're still exploring what you want to do professionally. So we were able to have a lot of success also with our advisors doing proactive outreach through this tool.
That proactive outreach, I think, is such a big thing. We were speaking with someone recently that had a very similar experience in terms of you're looking at your one-to-ones that your academic advisors are doing, and it's all the students with 4.0 GPAs. It's all the students that are doing really well, and just, it's helping them to perfect things. It's helping them. Same in the writing center. I don't think this is quite perfect, and the students that are really struggling and need that support often don't necessarily know where to get that support. I remember as a student myself, I was a student with a disability. I had no idea where the office was. I had absolutely no idea, and I didn't know that a writing center existed, or what was available to me. And actually being able to have that sort of proactive thing of, hey, here's a pointed message to you in your experience that you're going to feel that that student is going to come out of the woodwork wherever they are and go, that's that sort of support that I need, particularly those sort of non-traditional students that don't have a parent or, you know, that has been to university and gone, try this particular department as well. So yeah, I really like that. I guess moving on to sort of the next bit, I guess when you look at the project that you sort of did as a whole, I know you talked about some of the learnings there of, you know, don't come to people with the data straight away and go, here's what I found about what you've done and what you should do differently. But have you got any other sort of learning and advice if, you know, if someone listening today is thinking, you know, data is what we need to do. We need to jump straight in and really sort of find these moments. If someone starts that journey to towards doing something like you've done, what would that advice be?
Yeah. I definitely remembering that any data is really a shadow of what you actually care about. And so stepping back and trying to imagine what the people are actually doing. So we looked at, like I said, card swipes. But those card swipes mean very specific things. At a basketball game, it means a sense of belonging. At a computer lab, it means something that they're progressing, that they're utilizing resources, that they're finding the resources on campus. And so trying to understand what that data means at a human level can be really huge so that you understand what people are actually trying to accomplish when they're doing that behavior. And so making sure that you put that human lens on it. I know that we're moving in a strong direction with AI and AI tools, but doing the exact same thing and learning from some of the fumbles that the data industry has had, especially with the data driven. Data driven has never been a term that I've loved. I always like data informed or data backed or data supported, because data driven means that you're letting the data make the decision, and the data is only a reflection of the things that we care about. And so you still have to use your human judgment to make decisions. So even as we move away from these basic machine learning models like I was using, they're not basic, they're advanced machine learning models. But compared to what AI is doing, we need to make sure that we are doing a very similar thing of understanding the humans behind it and not just letting the AI drive the decisions, but help us be informed with the information that they're giving. So if anyone's picking up any of these automated techniques, whether through machine learning or through AI, making sure to have that human touch and really understand what they're trying to accomplish, because you're impacting humans. And these humans are taking on huge investments in their future at your university. And so offloading decisions can be very challenging, whether you're offloading it for your faculty, for your department heads, for your employees, or for your students. You have to be very thoughtful. And so I would encourage you to take a step back from anything that's data driven, AI driven, to really think about the impact it's having so that you can apply it to the best of your abilities and helping your people, whether it's employees or students, achieve the outcomes that you want them to.
Data driven gets me a little bit as well. I think the data driven for me feels like exactly what you just said. It's we're gonna do this because the data says we should, and we're gonna disregard what the effects of doing this is.
Yeah.
Um, we're just gonna do it because it says we should do this. Whether that means, you know, 5 people which really rely on like a human centered support are no longer going to get that support because the data says the rest of the students don't need it. So these 5 students aren't going to get it. It's things like that are, yeah, it's just tunnel vision, effectively.
Yeah.
Tunnel vision just for the data. I have really enjoyed this conversation. I really want to learn from you, though. What are your hopes and dreams of the impact of this research on higher education?
Hopes and dreams of the impact of this type of research is that people can be thoughtful in what is most effective for student success. So I mentioned several analyses that had very positive impacts, There were others that didn't seem to move the needle much. And as we are moving into this new AI era, higher education is going to change immensely. And it doesn't mean that the research that's been done is less valuable. It's actually more valuable because you're able to look at that thread from this is what we're doing as a university. Is it having an impact on where we want our students to go? And with the workforce changing, with the future of work being so unstable, with higher education having had such a static infrastructure for the past century or more, we are going to need to be more adaptive than ever. And to be more adaptive than ever, that means you need to be able to really understand how your inputs, what we're doing as universities, are impacting students and their outcomes. And a lot of what is being done traditionally is going to need to be questioned and it's going to need to be tweaked. And so having an eye towards evaluation, towards measurement can be really important, especially in these times of transition. So this is what I'm hoping to see. I know that Utah State is already engaged in these conversations of what experience are students going to need to be successful in the AI era? What are they going to need to learn differently or in different ways so that they can really springboard into employment? And without those conversations and with an eye backwards, you're really in jeopardy of not meeting students' needs and putting the organization in a touchy place. So those are a few things that I'm hoping that we see in the future.
Yeah, I love that. I think, yeah, that forward-thinking approach, that we're in a huge period of transition. We need to make sure that we learn from what we've done in the past, take that forward, but be agile. I think it's a really important lesson, I think, for all of us, especially with the world changing so quickly. I read something recently that said AI is probably going to be a bigger thing than the Industrial Revolution when it comes to the way that we, sort of work and live over the next couple of decades. Amanda, thank you so much for this. This has been really brilliant. I know I've certainly enjoyed it. I know Scott's enjoyed it as well. I can see him nodding along. Thank you so much for being here today. We really enjoyed having you.
Thank you so much, James and Scott. This has been an incredible conversation. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for joining us on Learning Outcome Leaders. We hope you found the conversation valuable and that it gave you some ideas for how you can elevate your own student experience. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Until next time, have an amazing day.